I'm Mr. Wineland here, going over chapter 11, y'all. It's called Dissolving Away a Life. We're getting into the unassigned lands. Lands that were not used in Indian Territory are then going to be set aside for white settlement. So we're going to talk about that right now. So, so we start to see that there was a lot of land that had been divided up for certain Native Americans, which was Indian Territory. But by 1870, we start to see that federal policy towards Native Americans was starting to change. We see that from removal, the treaties and reservations, breaking up of Indian nations by bringing in other nations from the Great Plains into Indian Territory, you're seeing the federal government is going to reevaluate Indian Territory. And so we see in 1870, the U.S. Supreme Court ruling that the Cherokee tobacco case stated that federal laws took precedent over their treaties. And we see by 1871, Congress would then pass a law that would stating no new treaties would be made with the native tribes since they were not considered sovereign nations. So this opened up the door for the Dawes Act. We see a lot of Friends of the Indians groups led by Alice Fletcher. Fletcher believed that Indians would be best served if they divided up their lands into homesteads, which would mainstream them into white society. So we do see that they kind of open up a little bit of the door for territories to be broken up. And so in 1877, the Dawes Severely Act extended U.S. law to the territory and dissolved some tribal ownership of the lands. And we see the answer number one is right here. Dividing lands into homesteads would mainstream them into white society. So by 1893, all tribal ownership dissolved for old tribes. We see allotments would be would be kind of put in place. 5 tribes initially not a part of the Dawes Act, but were then added in 1893. By 1895, we see Congress ordered a survey of the Indian Territory, a census of Indians, planned to divide lands of Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee Creek, and Seminole, and signed agreements of land distribution. In 1898, Curtis Act designed to force remaining tribes to agree to distribution plans and abolish the tribal government by 1906. By that time, we started to become a state. We see Crazy Snake Rebellion in 1901. The Creek group tried to resist agreements from their own government. Some Cherokee participated in the Kituwa secret society to resist. Both efforts were put down by federal marshals. We do see that there was a lot of land not being used prior to the 1890s. We see a lot of pressure into the settlement of 2 million acres of unassigned lands. Some Indians believe that it might be good for the local economy to have individuals come in and settle these lands. Others did not. But the term boomer, which is your definition, was a term used to describe those who were part of the land boom, meaning trying to increase settlement in that region of the unassigned lands. We see David L. Payne was one of those. He led a group of settlers to the unassigned lands, was driven off by federal troops, but he returned several times, until Couch, a group of 400 settlers, refused orders to leave, but were surrounded and not allowed to get supplies. That gave up and went. So, David L. Payne, we're going to read a story about him probably this week. Assign it on Monday. But there's an article about him and how he helped open up the territories by basically trying to start his own city in the unassigned lands. He was pushed back, unfortunately died in a tragedy, but he helped up the land boom, or we know as the land run. The answer number 4 is right here in this point. By the law of reason to be there were forbidden to be in the territory. Tribes sent delegates to Washington to ask for help to remind politicians of the law. Marshals watch for illegal activity. 1981, that Indians did have an interest in unassigned lands. We see opening the unassigned lands continued in the nation's capital, Pleasant Porter, Muskogee Creek tribe, and others offered to give up all claims to unassigned lands, almost 225 million for $225 million. In 1889, there was a rider or addition to the Indians Appropriations Act, which is your answer number two, authorized payment to the tribe in exchange for dropping on the lands, approved by President Benjamin. So answer number six. The Homestead Act did ultimately allow settlers into the region at noon on April 22nd, 1889 to claim a homestead. Sooners, they were those who crossed the line early and staked a claim on the choice land in the territory. First land opening, the word spread quickly of the opportunity for good land. Rich, poor, black, white, young, old gathered in Texas and Arkansas days ahead of the entry date. They gathered on the south side of the lands at Purcell and on the north side in Kansas, and the Cherokee Outlet on the west near Fort Reno and Kingfisher Station. We see that the land run in territory occurred on April 22nd of 1889. People would basically get there at the borders early. They would sleep at night and then get up early as soon as they could. We had noticed that people across the United States were trying to get to the borders of Kansas, Texas, and Arkansas, many parts of the United States around Indian Territory. Trains packed with people across the prairie trying to get there in time to go capture land. Your answer number three is all in this point. Wagons, horses were joined by buggies, surreys, bicycles, mules, and even people on foot trying to get land. So everybody trying to stake their claim. Claiming land, homesteaders had to find surveyor stones. There were stones put in place for people to find this land. They obtained the title to the land after living and farming there for 5 years. Fists, guards, and courts were used to settle disputes about ownership. Eventually, things would kind of get a little chaotic as people are trying to fight for land. Eventually, lotteries would be set in place for future runs, or these were drawings that would help determine the land holdings. Once people kind of made their way in, the Seminole Townsite Improvement Company came in early and mapped out the locations for new towns. Mass of people caused towns of tents, or known as tent towns. Instantly established Guthrie, Edmond, Oklahoma Station, Norman, Stillwater, and Lisbon, known as Kingfisher. These towns were created there in central Oklahoma. Oklahoma City had about 12,000 people the first day, and many towns would start local governments and established quickly. And with these new towns, you had blacksmith, barbers, would also serve as dentists, lawyers, and merchants set up shop quickly. Food and water ran low in Guthrie due to huge numbers of settlers. In 1890, African-American Edward McCabe established his own town known as Langston, not far from Guthrie, and thousands of blacks were part of the land run. 50 all-black communities were formed eventually. And then the homesteading. Settlers might have used their wagons as their first home. If trees were scarce, dugouts or soddies were served as the home. Basically, what would happen is because there was not a lot of trees, there's not a lot of wood, a lot of these settlers would come in and use the actual dirt in the ground to create mud bricks, and then they would build a home, and then they would use their wagon to create doors and windows. Barns were often built first. Sod houses were insulated and safe from fires. Rain caused a wet and muddy mess, though. Bugs could come in. If farm was successful, small wood house would be built eventually. Most farms would add cellars, food storage, tornado protection, windmills, and for pumping water, and cisterns collect rainwater. So there you go. We are going to talk more about the beginning of stages of settling Indian Territory, eventually leading to the state of Oklahoma.